Now we're on to rebuilding the clutch assembly on this CB750. The clutch itself is just a standard motorcycle clutch where you have a whole bunch of plates. You have the friction plates with the tabs on the outside, and you have the metal plates with the tabs on the inside. And the friction plates dig into splines on the outer clutch basket, and the steel plates fit into the grooves on this inner basket. What you need to do when you're checking the parts are for the plates is just to make sure that they're flat and that they are the right thickness. So the minimum specification is 3.1 millimeters. That's reading about 3.5. I've gone and checked all the plates and they're all well within spec. You should also check for flatness, especially for the steel plates, to make sure they're not warped. And I've done that. I've put them on the surface table and they're all perfectly flat, and I'm very happy with those. So that's the basket of components that make up the friction part and the clutch itself. Now, the way that the clutch works is the basket is driven by the crankshaft. So this always turns when the engine's turning, and then the center shaft here will then turn depending on whether the clutch is engaged or not. And the clutch is engaged by these two plates being forced together. Now they will go together, and they have springs on here that will then keep them apart, keep them squashed together, so that all of these plates are tightly squeezed together, and therefore you'll get drive from the outer basket to the inner basket along that shaft. When you activate the clutch in this particular Honda, the actuation device pushes on a plate that then pushes this rear plate back, and therefore makes these two parts come apart. These two pieces you need to look at quite carefully. This is quite a delicate component. They call this the pressure plate. You need to check that the surface is flat because it will wear, and you need to make sure that where the grooves are flat. I've actually had to skim this. The pegs are fragile. Here's another clutch plate where the peg is broken off. It's very easy to break these things off because a lot of people will try to hold the plate from rotating by putting a bar through here while you're tightening some of the other nuts, and these things break off remarkably easily. So those are the components to have a look at. I say this is the part that sits at the back, and it's the pressure plate. This is the piece that holds the steel plates on it, and you can see there's holes drilled through it, so you need to make sure these holes are clear. Just blow an air line through it, or just poke some holes through it, some wire through it, and you can see it comes through. And they are oil feed holes. And the idea is that when this basket is running around, the oil will end up in here and will then seep through and be able to get in between the clutch plates, so that it allows the clutch to function, and it will allow the plates to move independently of each other. The other thing to check on here is, I don't know if you can quite see it, but you can see some witness marks along the top there. That's where the teeth of these metal plates have been digging into it. You just need to make sure that there are no ridges. You can just do that by running a fingernail along it, and you can see that there's no ridges there, so that's not going to stop the plates from moving. You also need to check these pins, and I've done that, and you can see on some of them there's been some little move there, and I've left on this one here. I haven't finished this one. If you listen carefully when I run my fingernail along here, you'll hear that there are still grooves on this pin. And what that means is that when the plates are moving in this direction, it may actually hang up on some of these grooves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop and file that down so that each of the pins are smooth, so that therefore when these plates are moving within the basket, they don't actually get held up by any of these false grooves on this plate. So there we go. I've filed that and I've sanded it down a little bit, and now I'm happy that they're quite smooth, and that plate is doing exactly what it needs to do. So in the back of here, the first thing you put in is obviously the basket's in and it's attached. There is a very thick, heavy splined washer that goes over the spline shaft. It's a bit of a strange washer because it does fit over the spline shaft, but it actually goes past beyond the spline, and it can't actually rotate. So don't worry about that. That's not a flaw. We can then put the pressure plate in. some people like to build the plates slowly and they like to put it onto here, but I wanted to show you something first, is that if you don't mark these things up, you can get them mixed up. So if you put these two together like that, you'll notice that they don't actually fit together. So you have to make sure that the two halves will fit together so they actually join in the spline. So what I do is, inside this basket there's a number 4, and what I do is I just put a little white mark on the peg that comes through the number 4 hole, so that when I've got this in place and I come to put this part on at the end, I know that I need to line up number 4 with that. So that's the pressure plate put in place. You then have to put these friction plates in. So there's friction plate, steel plate. I'll fast forward to this bit because this bit's boring. There we go, that wasn't quite as bad as I expected. So now what I need to do is I just need to line up all these pegs on the steel plates. So therefore I can then put this piece on, and remember I'm lining up the number 4 peg with the back of that. And at the same time I'm trying to get the plate over the splines. I know it's now fully in because I can see that the spline shaft is now flush with this plate. There are 3 parts that go on here before you put the pressure of the actuating plate on. That's the actuator plate. Stick that over there for the side for the moment. You then have, behind that you have springs which fit over the top of that, but the first thing I'd want to do is I'd want to measure the length of the springs, make sure the springs are all within spec. And that one bounces, which is always a good sign. So that's 35.3. Minimum spec is just under 31 millimeters or 1.2 inches, so that's well within spec. People don't often check those, and they really should, because here's a spring that came out of another engine. I don't know if you can see that. The bottom one is what it should look like, and this is the one that actually came out. And you can see how bent it is. So that spring came out of a clutch, and clearly that's not one I'm going to stick back in a clutch at all, but you can see how much abuse these things take, especially if you put too many plates in, or you put the wrong thickness of plate in, or you don't have the right stack up, or and I think the instance with this was that this plate didn't sit flush, and so therefore it wasn't fully back, and so therefore all the springs were overly compressed. So I've checked all these springs anyway, they're all within spec, so I'm happy with those. So the next thing to do now is to secure this inner basket. So there are 3 pieces. The first is I call it a spring washer, but really it's a Belleville washer. And I don't know if you can see it properly, but it is actually slightly dished. And so that's like a saucer at the moment, and that saucer side goes towards the engine. So you stick that on there. It's a spring washer, so when you tighten it up, it actually creates some pressure against the plate here. I've then got a new lock washer. I need to find something to open that with. That's the part number if anybody's interested. And these things get a huge amount of abuse, and I'll show you one of the ones that came off. And that's one of the ones that came off the bike, and you can see the state it's been in. It's been used many times. It's not been tightened properly, and you can see people have tried to remove it without actually taking the tabs back. And the idea here is that you put it in again. In this instance here, the dish goes to the outside, and you can see there's 2 pins and a spigot that comes out, and the spigot fits in there. And so you put that on like that. That goes over the top. And so therefore the washer can't move. And then when you put this piece on here next, you can then fold those tabs over, and goes into one of those slots. So you need to put this on. That gets tightened up to, I think it's 32 to 36 foot-pounds, and I think it's like 45 to 50 Newton meters. And there is a tool that you can buy to actually tighten that. I made one out of a socket. I'll just like tighten that up. But as you can see, you need to have some way of securing this basket. And you can secure it from the other side, or you can get a clutch holding tool. But do not, under any circumstances, hold it on these parts here, because they will break. So if you've got anything, you need to put it into here. You can buy these clutch holding devices that will hold onto those webs, and that'll do fine. Or if you can manage to hold the shaft on the other side, you can get in there, you can torque it up. Once you've done that, you need to fold over one of these tabs into the groove, which basically stops that nut from backing off. Then you stick these springs. I'll just show you what else you need to do. You then put the springs over the top like that, and then you put this plate over that. And you can see there's on the other side of the bearing, there's a little spigot that goes into the hole here, and then on this side you have it's a bearing. It's a thrust bearing, and what this does is this is where the actuator pushes on here and pushes that plate in, so it releases the plate and it releases the clutch. And that is the basics of a clutch on a CB750 Honda. Okay, so on to the next part of the clutch. I've got the plate put on, torqued up. These are 8 to 10 Newton meters. They're just small 10mm bolts, so don't tighten too tight or else you will break them off. And that's the clutch basket put together as we saw earlier. The actuator mechanism actually fits into this plate here, and it's quite a clever little cam system. So it's basically got a plate with 3 ball bearings in it, and there's 2 plates with recesses built into them, so that when it's not activated it sits like this, and when you rotate the inner part relative to this plate here, it comes up. So therefore you can see there's a movement between the 2 plates there, and that movement, that fits like this, and there's an actuation rod that goes through this plate, and that rod sits in here, and so that when you rotate it, this part is held by the outer case, and so when you rotate this piece, it moves in and pushes that rod on that plate there and operates the clutch. So the first thing I need to do is I need to put a new O-ring onto this shaft here. That goes in there, and you screw that in through the actuating rod. I just like to put it in far enough to get the O-ring. In fact, I should just put a little bit of oil on that to make it go in a little bit easier. No point in making life difficult. And so pull that through just so the O-ring comes into there. And you can adjust this later, because that is actually where you make the adjustments of the clutch. The case itself is just very straightforward. That dowel pin goes into this section here, so that goes like that. And then as you rotate this, that will move out. Now we have 2 seals here. These are the old seals that I took out. I mean, they're not in bad shape. They're probably, you could have used them again, but I'd already bought some new seals, so I might as well use the new seals. This one here is for the actuator arm. And again, there's a section on the inside of it where the spring is. The spring goes towards the engine, so there's a blank part looking out at you. I'll just find some to make it go in a little bit easier. Not fitting like that, so I'm happy with that. And I've also got a new seal for the Kickstarter shaft. You need to check the status of the Kickstarter shaft. It sometimes gets a little bit corroded. but it did get corroded, but I've cleaned it up with some emery paper and it's in fine shape now, so I'm happy enough to use that. And again, it fits in there with the spring facing inwards. There we go. Lovely, lovely. So I'm going to assemble the actuator arm as well now. So the actuator arm it's got a dog leg on it. And it's got a section here at the end where the cable comes into. The dog leg goes into the case, so I'll need to than I was giving it. There is a washer that just fits on the top of that, and a nut. Yeah, I should probably pull this through a bit further so I've got a bit more to play with. And that'll do the job. So I'll just leave that like that and I can adjust that later. And now the actuator mechanism, just checking that it works, which it does, which I'm happy about. There we go. There. Now there is a small spring that fits on here, which goes over that peg. And the case that fits over the top of it stops the spring from popping off. But that's the clutch actuator mechanism all in place, all ready to go. And I'm now ready to go and put that onto the bike. So just to show you how the clutch operates, I'll hold the plate like this. And as the clutch pulls like this, you can see that that moves in. And if you see on this side, when I do that, that pin moves in this direction and operates the clutch itself. So that's exactly how you would expect it to do. Next thing we need to do is mount that up onto here. We have two dowels that need to go in. And they go in those two holes there. There you go. I then have a gasket to put on. He's just trying to remember which way this goes. Dowel and dowel. Out. Yes, there we go, that's the way it should go, right. So I'll just give it some, let that gasket seal around here just to keep everybody happy. Tiny, tiny, tiny little bit. Just enough to hold it and give it a little bit of extra encouragement. There's not a lot of oil in there at the best of times, but it's always good just to have that, and it also means that the gasket doesn't fall off when you're trying to assemble things. put it on, you have to put it over the kick starter shaft first. Offer it up to the dowels. Just encourage it to go on a little bit. There we go, that's it all in place now. Just needed to go over that, check that it still works, and as you see, every time I pull that, it tries to push the case off, so I know that it's working. I'll check that the Kickstarter still turns, but I then need to put the bolts in. Now with just all different types of bolts around here, there's 10 in total. 3 big ones and, surprise, surprise, 7 small ones. 3 big ones, the first big one goes under where the Kickstarter is. That's you can tell because it's got a longer section of casing that it has to go through. And the other 2 long ones go through where the dowel pins are, which is standard Honda design. And then the rest of them go into the other holes. I'm sure you don't really want to watch me putting all these in, but I like to start them by hand before I use any power assistance. Go. And there we are, it's better. Everybody's happy now. And that's it. What I'll do is I'll go and I'm going to need to clean that out because I'm not overly happy with it, but I'll give it a quick run through with a tap. And that's the clutch cover on. And next thing we'll do is we'll talk about how we put the cover on the top and how we set up the clutch and how we get the clutch adjusted to operate the way you want it to. Thank you.